if you were to walk through my door right now, I would say, "Hey, it's so good to see you." I would welcome you in, offer you a cup of coffee, and we would sit down at this table right here, and we would talk about what it takes to raise courageous, resilient, lifelong learners. Welcome to the Home Edify podcast. My name is Kristen Malfris, and I am so excited to introduce to you Mackenzie Wilcox. She is a content creator behind the account Twigs and Sage. Her content focuses on everything from homemaking to homeschooling to Jesus and, interestingly enough, adoption, which is something we're going to be talking about today. She is the mama to 4 children on this side of heaven, and she homeschools all 4 of them. So I just want to say welcome, Mackenzie. And can you just tell us a little bit about Twigs and Sage? What happened to make you want to name Twigs and Sage Twigs and Sage?
Sure. So when I was thinking of a name for my Instagram account and blog at the time, I liked the idea of sage because I've always loved herbs, and sage is actually known as the wisdom herb. So I thought that was a cool nod to homeschooling. And then we were at that point homeschooling really, really little kids. And so a lot of times our homeschool looked like being outside, digging in the dirt. And I remember a lot of times they pick up twigs and use it sort of like a utensil or sort of like, a tool to write with. And, they'd make their soup with it, mix it around. But then they'd also kind of just naturally just kind of write the letters that they were learning, or they'd practice writing their name. And I thought, this is really cool. They're using twigs and we're outside in nature, and this is school. And so Twigs and Sage kind of came to be through that way.
That is awesome. So tell me more about the adoption. I know I've seen on your Instagram account that you're going through this process of adoption. I really want to dive in and just let listeners hear your story. Can you tell us more about that, about who you are, what you do through your Instagram account?
Yeah, sure. So my Instagram account is primarily a homeschool account, but I feel like so much of our homeschool is not just the time we spend actually doing academic lessons, but really throughout our whole life. And so that is reflected on my Instagram page. I share a lot of recipes. I share a lot of daily rhythms. And I also just show what it's like to be a mom to 4 children and what that role looks like. So where homeschooling is the focus, and certainly where I share a lot of book recommendations and curriculum picks and things that pertain to our homeschool rhythm and routine, I do feel like I also just share our life because we learn through living, and our life is a big part of our school. So more recently, I started sharing also our adoption process. And we started that process in June. And that's kind of just, sprinkled into my Instagram account now, as like I said, because we share just our life and everything we do. And right now, adoption is a big primary focus of that.
That is super cool. So what made you want to dive into adoption? How did the Lord lead you to that point?
So really after 2 children, I didn't know that my body could handle another pregnancy. But, the Lord changed our hearts, and I really desired to have another baby. So we had our 3rd biological child. And after that, I thought, okay, we've had 3 children. We're Christians, and as Christ followers, we're called to either adopt or support those who are adopting, because we see in scripture that we're supposed to care for orphans and widows. So I think if we're going to have more children, we want to pursue adoption. And so that was our hearts in 2020. We actually started the process because the Lord once again brought the desire for more children to our hearts. Here we were thinking we were going to have 2 children, and then it was 3 children. And then, okay, I think that we can hear the Lord saying 4. But we always thought if we were going to have more than 3, we would adopt. Let's do it. And we got so many obvious signs from the Lord that was not the time to pursue adoption. And we felt at peace about that. And now looking back, I know that it's because we were meant to have the baby that did unfortunately pass away when I was in the 2nd trimester of pregnancy. But, he was meant to be part of eternity. And I have that hope that we'll meet him someday. But then even beyond that, we had our little daughter, Oakley. And so it was like, okay, God was saying not no to adoption, but just not yet. And then fast forward to Oakley really not even being born yet. I was like, I want to adopt. And my husband kind of laughed like, calm down, Mackenzie. We literally are just having baby. We don't need to look into adoption just yet. So I think the Lord had put that desire on my heart for a while now. And just my husband agreed, but we were waiting for the timing that we felt like God was saying, this is now. This is the time to do this.
Wow. That adoption has always been something that has been huge on my heart, because you see throughout scripture, like, the Lord adopts us as his own. And just to see your story too throughout Instagram and what you've shared, I just see how it definitely reflects the gospel and the love that he has for us. You mentioned before that you had some miscarriages before then. Is it okay if I ask some questions about that? So I have a friend actually who has endured that kind of grief, and I have as well. What would be your advice for a homeschool family that is enduring that? And how has that helped your kids grow and build character in the midst of something like that? How do you handle that, I guess, is the best way to ask.
It was hard. And we just read today James 1:2, where it says, "Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds." We just learned about that today. And we learned about how that just increases our perseverance and allows us to face harder things with more ease. And I gave you the example of, if you never run and all of a sudden your friends are at the playground and they say, "Come catch me," you're going to be huffing and puffing. You'll be winded because your body won't have been through something that seems hard, which is running. Whereas if you run a little each day, then when you're at the playground, running and keeping up with your friends is no problem. So looking, you know, forward to where we are now from how hard that season was when it happened in 2021, I think we can see that God was preparing our hearts for the harder things that were coming. And even with the adoption, we've had to really relinquish control and just take a leap of faith. And I think some of the things I learned through our miscarriage has prepared me for this. And even though it's a different situation, it's almost aligned my heart and my children's hearts with the what ifs. What if something doesn't work out with our current match? What if, fill in the blank? It's like we've been there, and we've also walked pregnancy after loss where we just had to give every single day to the Lord. And that's really helped from when it happened to now, seeing that God has a purpose. And also the purpose in it being that I've been able to speak to so many women who have been through the same thing and encourage them and just shared hope with them, because it's not an easy road to walk, and it's very scary. It's very challenging, and it's never the club I wanted to be a part of. It's never the ministry I wanted to be in. And it still is, really, really painful. At the same time, the Lord uses these trials and these challenges to refine us. And, you asked about how that impacted our homeschool. Crazily enough, the week we were on in our homeschool, when we had found out our baby had passed away, but I had yet to gone through the full miscarriage process. So I was physically able to keep homeschooling, even though mentally I just wanted to lock myself in my room and cry. I had 3 little kids counting on me. So we kept plugging away at homeschool. And the week we were learning about was for the letter U for us. And it was the scripture about how we were created wonderfully and perfectly inside of, our mother's womb. And it seemed so cruel to have that week that we were learning. I remember snapping the book shut, and I was like, we're not doing school today. But looking back and seeing how we got through that season, it really is beautiful that is how our baby was created and is always treasured, always loved, never felt that pain. And I can look back on that lesson and, it still hurts a little, but I think God lined that up for a reason too. And my kids got to encourage me and help me heal, and I helped them. And, it's just a daily walk of faith even still.
That's so encouraging. I know that's painful, but there's so many moms that go through something like that, and they still have to walk through the day-to-day life of, like you're talking about, like homeschooling your kids and having to put that foot forward. And I feel like sometimes it can be just such a taboo topic to talk about, but that grief is so real for so many people. And so I really appreciate you sharing your experience with that.
I think one of the hard things with homeschooling is sometimes persevering through our days that we're just really off, whether it's something as deeply tragic as a miscarriage, or even just waking up and feeling like I need a mental health day, but there are people counting on me. And you just learn how to show up and do it even when you're not feeling like it. But also your children see that sometimes you need a break, and that's part of homeschooling, is showing them how life is sometimes, and how sometimes you have to make adjustments to your schedule when life's not going exactly as you planned.
Right. I'm sure that's made them more empathetic too. Like they get to see mom day to day. Like there's as a homeschool mom, my kid is like there with me dealing with real life, everyday situations. And I'm sure that that has just created more of an eye for them of just, what's the word? How do I put this? Of creating emotional intelligence with them. Like just knowing that you're going through that, like as a family. It's not just
Right.
you alone, but it's together, you know? So what has your daily rhythm been like as a homeschool family? I know you mentioned that earlier.
It has changed and fluctuated over the years as the kids have gotten older. I did feel like for a while they all kind of fell into the group of like preschool age. And so our lessons were a little bit shorter, a little bit simpler, kind of happened early morning. And then the rest of the day we had free for either library visits or, get togethers with friends or just an afternoon at home. But it's looking a little different as they get older. Now I have fifth grade down to a toddler, but if not including her, down to like a first, second grade level. And so my kids tend to want to get up a little bit later than I would like to start. And I've always toyed with, okay, do I want to embrace that as a beautiful thing of homeschool that you can start when you all want to? Or do I try to get us started when I feel we should because I'm a morning person? We typically fall somewhere in the middle. While they're still kind of sleepy and waking up is a great time for me to put some breakfast in front of them and dive into our Bible time. So I'm not feeling like, oh no, everybody has to be ready for the day, sitting down, pencil in hand by this time, ready to focus. It's a little bit more laid back in the morning. We typically like to make a hot breakfast and read together. Then I kind of send them on their way to do their responsibilities. And once that's done, we kind of gather all together to jump into our lessons. I start with our independent lessons first. So independent being like all of their each grade levels for math and language arts. Those are completed. And we take a few breaks, have snack. Then we do what's called our family style learning. And so that's really great because I can read aloud from one book and we all listen. And even with the varying ages and grades, they all get a little something out of it, which is awesome.
That's awesome. So a daily morning for you is wake up, give them some food, get them started, and then independent lessons, and then from there a family learning style.
Yeah, it works better for us to do that because the family style learning is a little bit more laid back. And I feel like if I do it the opposite, where I'm focusing on their individual lessons, they're just kind of done by then. Their brain is full with a lot of information, and I have to get the most important stuff done before lunch, or it just doesn't happen. And sometimes we do a little school after lunch, sometimes we don't. But anything we do after lunch typically needs to be the more artistic subjects or just very laid back or kind of independent, like they can kind of take it and go do it themselves, but not me having to teach them different concepts like math or reading or anything. So they might all be doing the same study, but they can kind of do it at their own pace in their own timeline, just knowing that they need to get it done by the end of the day.
I gotcha. So how did you reach the point where you're at with curriculum? What kind of learning style do you use with your kids?
We've always really liked unit study learning. And so we've used My Father's World pretty much from the start, which really aligned really well with that. It was recommended to us by a friend. I tried it. I loved it. I guess my curiosity led me to try a few other things over the years, but we've always made our way back to My Father's World. And that's been consistently our curriculum for the past 6 years, other than maybe like a 6-month time where we tried something else. And we sometimes will pull additional resources just because I have some really talented friends who have made some lovely curriculums and we like to try to, dabble in those sometimes, or we'll maybe pause on our regular studies to do like a certain holiday study or a nature study of some sort. But we really love the unit studies. So focusing on something for about a week, really diving deep into it, taking out library books to enhance our studies. And then also everything being centered around the Lord and scripture. And so it's not just Bible time and the rest of the day has nothing to do with God. It's like God is woven into all of our subjects. When we learn about history, it's the way that these men and women made a difference for the Lord. When we learn about science, it's because he created things to work a certain way, So that was important to me when finding a curriculum too.
I gotcha. So what led you to homeschooling just in general?
I was public schooled as well as you. And I think that I didn't want that same experience for my kids right off the bat because I was a Christian as a child, but I was under a lot of pressure from the public school environment to conform to the world. And I think you can only fight so hard before you start losing yourself and you start losing your identity in Christ in order to fit in. And you don't even realize it's happening and you fight it so hard, but it still just happens and it breaks you down. And I just never wanted to put my kids in that situation where they, weren't even, trained up in the way they should go yet. And they're trying to steer the course on their own without me guiding them. So that was a big part of it. But I didn't necessarily say homeschool would solve that. I thought maybe private school would solve that. It's open to either or. And so this is back, several years ago when my oldest was in preschool and even kindergarten. Neither of them are optional neither of them are required rather in our state. So I felt like it was a great couple of years to test the waters with a few different things. When we had her do 1 year at a private school, that was 3 days a week, just like 2 to 3 hours a day. I can't remember. And it was like her teacher was our pastor's wife. It was a very small class and right down the road from our house. And I thought, okay, we'll try that because she had some friends going there. And it was fine. But I knew it wasn't a long-term option because they only do preschool and kindergarten there. And as she was there, I was researching other private schools, also looking into homeschooling. And I really did want to give homeschooling a try. So I thought, okay, we'll try private school for a year, homeschooling for a year, then first grade when it's like required. I've got to have a decision made,
Right.
So our preschool year overall was fine, although I do feel like I forced my daughter into an environment she wasn't quite ready for. She was painfully shy. And it's actually really sad when I think back about how hard that was for her. I know that that's what some people have to do, but I didn't have to do it. And I wish I didn't. But we also look back and she has very fond memories of it too. And there were a lot of field trips I got to participate with her. And again, it was only a couple hours, a few days a week. But I was really refreshed to try the homeschooling direction because there was a big difference with her that year. Rather than her being so painfully shy, I just saw her, really coming into her own. She was just so confident. And I actually felt like she was confident even beyond our school environment, but just out and about. She just was embracing that better. Like the environment was better for her. And I actually read the book, The Call of the Wild and Free by Ainsley Arment, which really totally opened my eyes to private school and homeschooling are not created equal. And you might think that if your goal is just God and education, you might see them as apples to apples. But it's so much more that you learn you want for your child. And that's what homeschool has allowed us and why we've stuck with it and see ourselves sticking with it for the long run.
That's awesome. Oh my goodness, that's awesome. So what would you advise a mom who is teetering on the fence, kind of like you were in that situation? What is your biggest advice that you wish you would have heard or that you have to give to a new mom that is just trying to figure out if homeschooling is right for her?
I think if the child is younger, like in my situation, taking that pressure off of it being like, this has to be a year that counts towards their, 18 years of education or whatever it is. Because for me, that helped a lot when I did her kindergarten year. It was like, this doesn't work out. It's fine because we don't even have to do kindergarten in our state. So if that's an option for that particular mom, I would say just do your best and try it and see what you think. Somebody who's a little bit already a few years into their homeschool and they do feel like, oh, wow, like we'll be going into second grade right off the bat. This seems really important. We're learning how to read here. We're learning really hard math concepts. I would say one, just have the expectation of taking time to learn who your child is and not worry as much about academics that year. There's a term that's called like deschooling, I think. Really just like take time to just fall into a rhythm, doing things that you and your child love, baking together, learning a musical instrument, maybe taking online art classes, and slowly add in things that unquote needs or academic subjects. But I also think it helps if you find someone who has gone ahead of you, maybe try to spend a day in their homeschool with them, or at least ask them questions. We did that. We went over to a friend's house who was homeschooling a few grades ahead of us, and we just kind of were like a fly on the wall, and we realized, wow, this actually isn't as intimidating as I thought. It's kind of just like really fun and hanging out and everybody's learning and it's all good. And then also reading some really good books. And I would say the book I mentioned earlier, The Call of the Wild and Free, has been for me the most life-changing homeschool book I've read so far. And I would recommend it to anybody considering homeschooling.
Oh, okay. And we'll include that book in the notes for this show. So thank you so much for that. What has been the biggest joy as you've been homeschooling your kids?
I think seeing them light up when something really clicks or when something means a lot to them. Like if they're working really hard on something, kind of talking back to like learning how to persevere through hard things. And then all of a sudden that becomes not a hard thing anymore, but like a look at me, I did this. That is just so special to be there for that. And it's not in like a, oh, I taught them. Like it's not about that. It's about like seeing them kind of come into their own and be successful at something that they've worked so hard on. And that's just so amazing to see.
That is awesome. So I know we talked about edify, like home edify. Edify means to teach or instruct us to improve the mind and character. And so I know a lot of us, as we're homeschooling our kids, our focus isn't just on the education side of it. It's also on the character development side of it. What has that looked like for you and for your kids growing their character as you are, like you were talking about perseverance and them being able to see real life situations? But is there anything that just sticks out to you from your experience that would be encouraging for someone to hear about how your kids have developed in that way?
Our curriculum does a really good job starting out the preschool and kindergarten years with character building. Our curriculum for kindergarten, for example, for each letter of the alphabet would have like words to remember that would be focused on a certain character trait you were learning about that week. So either learning to work really hard or learning to be truthful. And the preschool has its own version of that too, but it just really, really starts that training from a very young age and ties into the academics in such a beautiful way, but the focus being who your child is becoming. And I think it's so important to start that really early. So even if we weren't using that curriculum, that's just something we would do on our own, just remembering to show them, you know, how to live a life that's pleasing to the Lord, being a good example yourself. And there are so many beautiful kids devotionals now with different ways to maybe focus on one of those character traits per week or something like that, and to really help your children learn how to make those godly choices when given a situation.
You're homeschooling multiple ages, like you mentioned before. What's the oldest age that you have?
11.
11. Okay. And so what's it like homeschooling multiple ages? And how long have you been homeschooling for?
6 years.
6 years. What has it looked like as they continue to grow? Because I have a kindergartner. She's my oldest. And I'm a little nervous about what it looks like as each of my kids get just a little bit older. What is that process? What did it look like for you?
I think when they're younger and you're trying to meet their needs, it can be a lot because you're trying to teach like maybe preschool and first grade and it's like similar stuff, but a little bit different. And like I said, now that they're a little bit older, we do a lot of family style learning, which simplifies things for me a lot, which is very nice. If we read a portion of a history book, for example, we read it all together, but then I might have my youngest orally narrate and I write down what he says. My middle might orally narrate, and then I help her write her summary with maybe copy work from what I've written down. Whereas my oldest might orally narrate and then also do a written narration that I then help her proofread. So it's one assignment, but they're each doing it at their own grade level. That's been helpful. But I would say that as they get older, I don't know, in some ways, I think you think that it's going to get a little bit easier, but it's not necessarily easier. It's just different. It requires more of your time. So while they are more independent, you can't really get away with as short of a school day anymore. And that's why I think, honestly, it's just so important to treasure those little years, not try to do too much too soon. A lot of people, I think, are really eager to just dive into like a big academic day. Kids, too. I think kids are academically eager. Because I think from what I've read, preschoolers especially, they don't understand the difference between work and play. So when they work, it feels like play. So people don't understand why their eager 4-year-old who wanted to write all these things, all of a sudden they're 6 and they won't even pick up a pencil. Really, they're not ready for it at 4, but they're just excited about it. So I think that we can allow children to do certain things and we can follow their lead. But we should never put that pressure on them just because they are acting like they're ready. Let them just be children and wait to start more formal lessons until they're like 6 or 7 years old, because there's just so much time to do those formal lessons, but so little time to just enjoy them being little.
So you're talking about child development, which of course I'm a nerd about to some degree. How much of that did you learn in order to teach your kids? What would you encourage parents to look up or learn about where each kid's stage is as they're trying to homeschool their kids? What does that look like?
I think that's a little bit hard because every child's going to look different and there's going to be different standards for public school and homeschooling. And you might not say that you agree with the standards of other schooling choices, but you also sometimes want to still know that your child's on track. And I think there are books about how to do that. The name of the one I'm thinking of is not coming to mind, but it essentially is like, if your child is this age and approximately this grade, these are sort of the things they should be knowing. So I think there's, again, some flexibility with it because homeschool should be flexible. In fact, I say first, second grade for my son because as a public school standard, he would be in first grade, but I'm having him do more second grade work at home because he's ready for it. But I think the opposite is true too. If you have a child who's not quite ready to do something, don't feel like you have to drag them through it just because someone says they should be doing that. You have to evaluate them for what their needs are and do what you feel is best for them. Recognizing the difference between them truly needing a little bit more time to understand a concept and laziness, because you never want to just say, oh, you don't feel like doing this, that's fine. We have to teach our children that accountability of doing hard things, even when we don't feel like it sometimes. But certainly giving grace in the areas of they truly don't understand, we can slow this way back. Who cares if we're half a grade behind or a grade behind? That's one of the beautiful things about homeschooling. Being able to customize their education is great. But I do understand what you mean. Some people kind of want to know what they should or shouldn't be doing. And there are ways to find that as a guideline. But I would say only ever keep it as a guideline because you just have to be flexible with your child, what their needs are. And if you're using a curriculum you trust, if you picked it, you should trust it, right? Trust them. Honestly, I think sometimes I would second guess our curriculum. Like, this is too simple. I don't think this is enough. And so I'd supplement and I'd add to it. And then 2 years later, I see how it builds and all of us we're doing the harder stuff that I tried to do. And I took the joy away. And then I'm like, they can leave it simple for a reason, because before we know it, we'll be at the more complicated levels here. So don't ever feel like you're not doing enough because you most likely are doing play.
Lesson planning. What does that look like for you? Because I've seen on your Instagram how you go through the process of making sure everything's ready for the next day. How much time goes into that?
Not really too much time. Our lessons are written out in our teacher's manual, which is really helpful. But even if I didn't use a curriculum like that, I would probably just say, okay, we're doing page 76 for math. We're doing page 37 for English. I might just write that down. That's pretty much written down for me. But rather than leaving it at that, I just take a few minutes to open up to that page. I like to put like a bookmark or a little tab just to have our place right there. And I might just write it down somewhere so that after we do it, I can just erase it off of the whiteboard and just know, okay, we did that for the day. And if we don't get to it, then I just know to add it to tomorrow's schedule. But I typically just review for even just a few minutes the night before. Make sure if there's any random materials we need, like baking soda for a cooking project, I have it on hand so I'm not wasting time like digging through my pantry trying to find it or something. So I feel like there are some curriculums that are open and go. I feel like ours is not quite open and go, but it's also not full blown, like you have to prep for hours. But I think it's smart, whether your curriculum is open or go or not, to always familiarize yourself with what you're going to be teaching the next day to a certain degree, because you don't want to sit there and read a paragraph of instructions times 3 kids. Like already right there, you just lost like 5-10 minutes. And so you lost them and they're running off to go play because they think like it's school's done. Mom's not doing anything. So I try to do that ahead of time, even just highlighting the key parts that way I kind of know what I'm doing a little bit more.
I gotcha. So how long is a school day for you?
I would say on average, it's 3 to 3.5 hours. Our goal is always to start by 9, but again, we kind of do a little bit of that Bible time by like 8 or so. If we're really, really doing good, we start just our day at 8 and we try to be done by 12. If we're starting closer to 9, we usually do a little bit more after school, which is maybe that last like half an hour. But I would say on average, like 3.5 hours.
I gotcha. So many parents are worried about the socialization aspect of homeschooling. And you've talked before about how your daughter just like opened up as soon as she started homeschooling. What do y'all do to make sure that they're in community and they're not isolated and that they are that they are learning some of those social skills? Because I know a lot of parents are worried about that. And what are some practical tips for moms who are trying to get out of the house at the same time as homeschooling?
Yeah, I think most people who understand homeschooling also understand that other school options are not necessarily social, even though they're in a group of peers. That's not necessarily what real life socialization will look like, always in
Right.
the same people, the same ages and whatnot. So I think we all kind of understand that. Maybe not the people who don't truly understand homeschooling, but I think that that has been kind of now debunked. And that book that I mentioned has a great chapter called like the socialization myth, which helps me feel confident in not worrying about socialization early on. But I think homeschooling affords you some really awesome opportunities for socialization and are real life opportunities. For example, when we built our house, we had lots of contractors in and out of the house. And my husband's in the industry, so they were friends of his. So I felt comfortable letting the kids follow them around.
That is awesome.
Well, if you weren't like in the morning, I'd always say, hey, they're not bothering you, right? But I mean, there was one day where the guy who was doing some of our electrical was here, and my kids just followed him around. And by the end of it, I think they all could have been electricians. They were so social with him. I mean,
Right.
that was an opportunity that they wouldn't have had. It. This was like a random Monday, and they would have been in school if they weren't homeschooled, and they would have missed out on that opportunity. Talking to a person not their age. For my daughters, a person not their same gender, which it's very cliquey in school too. So like they don't
yeah.
always have opportunity, and learning about something that's like a real life skill. So that was awesome. And I feel like it's not just opportunities like that, but out and about at playgrounds, they're super eager to go say hi to, new friends, which I do find is a little bit harder as they've gotten older because when we were like preschool, kindergarten age, a lot of times lots of kids were there. But now when we're there, it's not too many kids because most of those kids are in school. But on the rare times there are kids there, they're always super social with them or just in the stores out and about. So those are kind of ways that socialization happens organically. And then I've taken the steps to plug them into a couple of activities a week to kind of just help them to really find their passions. So for me, socialization is a bonus, but we more so started these activities because they were interested in some of the things that these, extracurriculars afforded. And that's been great. And so sometimes they've done horse camp where they go to like a horseback riding camp for a week in the summer. Right now we do a weekly co-op on Fridays and they have 4 blocks there. So they're being taught by other teachers, which are just other parents, and they meet some really fabulous friends there, which has been great. And we do just 1 or 2 other activities a week, but we don't want to like overflow our schedule. But then there's also church. So they have their Sunday school classes. I think it can actually be really easy to be too social. Like sometimes you have for a little bit and be like, we're good. We've got plans every single day. Like to homeschool, we have to sometimes be home. Really. But you know what? Our preference is to be home for some of our homeschooling. I like packing it up and bringing it to the park sometimes, but I also like just being home for a park.
Right.
Yeah.
That is the biggest thing that I have discovered. Like, as I'm homeschooling, I realize you can flood your schedule if you want to. And if you're not careful, you're like, oh my goodness, I have not been home all week. I am so exhausted by the middle of the week. But when you said that, I totally resonated. That is so true. You mentioned your husband. Has he always been on board with homeschooling? What did that look like as y'all started exploring that as a possibility?
Yeah, I think he honestly kind of just trusted me in that area. And he had the experience of homeschooling, private school, and public school.
Wow. Okay. That's
he,
awesome.
he's kind of done a little of it all. And his best experience was homeschooling, although he sometimes butt heads with his mom. Obviously that can happen sometimes. But I think that also he knew the style in which I was planning to homeschool was going to be even that much different than his experience. And I think he really supported it. I think that originally he was more leaning towards private school just because I was actually working at the time when we first started homeschooling. And we kind of thought I was in the process of growing my career and I would be able to set my hours to when the kids were in school. But then I just felt like, okay, homeschooling is on my heart and I want to be able to commit to that. Maybe I just shouldn't work anymore. And that was like a big, like, wait, what? Not that he didn't want me to homeschool, but we just kind of had to reprioritize our finances and just get past that. And then he was really on board, especially when he saw how positive of an experience it was.
So you gave up some stuff to actually homeschool, and I feel like that's a sacrifice that a lot of people don't talk about in some ways, but it's not just like, yeah. What did that look like for you? Like rescheduling everything to make that a priority?
Yeah, I was a photographer for 8 years, and I was at a point where my business was growing, and I thought as the kids got older, it would be easier for me to work because they'd be able to, just be independent and go off and do their own thing. But, I think it was harder because all of a sudden they were very into building that relationship with me where they were asking a lot of questions and needing advice. And, obviously that's what, a child needs from their mom. But I guess just I hadn't experienced that yet. So I didn't know. I was used to preschoolers who just kind of play at my feet. But then all of a sudden they're getting older and it was like, wow, this is really hard. And then let's add homeschooling on top of it. And I'm never going to have time to edit or go do these photo shoots or really homeschooling is Monday through Friday. So my only time off from that is on the weekend to go shoot weddings and photo shoots again. And so it was a lot of prayer. And I actually really felt God saying, like, I want you to focus on educating your children and not just educating them, but just being a mom. And where I thought I had a career that I could balance both, it was something that I was just holding on to that he just really said, open it up and give it to me. And it was hard, but looking back, I wish I had done it sooner. We had to make some changes to our lifestyle and it was a sacrifice for sure. But it's so worth it. And I think anybody can take somebody's pictures, but nobody can parent my children the way I can. And I could never get those years back, but I could go become a photographer someday when they're all grown. So looking back, it was an easy trade-off, but it was hard in the moment.
Oh, yeah. I love that perspective. Circling back to the adoption, how excited are your kids for this? I mean, this is happening in March. Is that right?
Yeah, they're so excited. They love anytime they get another sibling, and I think they'd have have a million children, if it were up to them. They're always so eager about someone joining our family and so excited about it. And they were all old enough to really remember my fourth pregnancy and how special those newborn days were. And so they're so excited. When we started the adoption process, we didn't really know what it would look like or, how old the child would be or anything. But as it turned out, we are adopting a little boy who is due to be born in March. So he's not even born yet. And so they're just so excited for that season again with, a new baby. And they just already affectionately have all these little nicknames for him. And they've been such a huge help in planning the nursery. And we have a countdown in the homeschool room that they just can't wait every week to go cut another link off that chain. And it's really fun to see.
So I saw something online about an interesting story about a birthday associated with this. Tell us how you found out that you were matched with a family.
Oh, so yeah, the birthday associated with the adoption. Yes. So we had sent our application to adopt this summer. And then we were working on getting home study approved and we were approved by September. And from there, normally it's 9 to 12 months minimum to match. But I had felt like God put on my heart that we were going to match on October 28th, which was just a month and a half or so after being home study approved. And it was my daughter Adele's 9th birthday.
Oh.
And I couldn't tell if it was like God telling me we were going to match that day or if I just really wanted to. It was like a mix of like, Lord, I think we are, but I also pray that we do. Like I really just felt like I wanted that for her. My daughter, Adra, when we found out we were pregnant with her sister, Oakley, it was on Adra's birthday. And I really wanted this for Adele. I really wanted to be able to always look back and say, and Adele, remember we matched on your birth. So when we see this little baby in the future, it's that same sweet connection that Adra and Oakley have, So I remember going to bed on October 26th and I said to my husband, I think we might get our phone call tomorrow that we've matched. And that was crazy because we actually only had one yes out there, which means we had seen a case and we said yes to it. And we actually only got that case a few days before the weekend. And I thought, well, we can't even match on October 28th if there aren't any cases to even say yes to. But a case came in. It was like a wonderful God thing. And I thought everybody's going to want to match with this case. It's probably not going to be us. But we said yes. And then we just waited and prayed. But fast forwarding back to the October 27th, I just went to bed feeling like I think we might get our phone call tomorrow. Our consultant emails you if the expectant mom doesn't pick you. She calls you if she does. So like I got up on October 28th, my daughter's 9th birthday. We were celebrating and I'm kind of like looking at my phone a little bit throughout the day. Like, are we going to get this call? Or worse, are we going to get an email that she didn't pick us? Please not that. At least wait till, I don't want to not match on her birthday. It's a miracle to match. In general, it's a miracle to match fast. And then, don't you know, my phone starts ringing and it was our consultant and the mom picked us and we literally matched. And then again, that not being enough miracle, it was on October 28th, the day that I felt like the Lord had for us from the very start. And my daughter Adele, if you see this video, is the one, especially out of all four of the kids, just like losing her mind. And
No.
it's such a special thing, you know?
Oh man, that is so sweet. What is the adoption process like?
So it starts out where you have to decide if you want to pursue fostering to adopt, which is what we had looked into in 2020. And I think a lot of people jump to foster to adopt. But if you know anything about fostering, you have to realize that a child who is being fostered has typically been removed from their home for a neglectful situation. And they're not always adoptable because typically they're temporarily removed and the goal is reunification. So do some foster families get to adopt the children that they've fostered? Absolutely. You can't go into it with your heart set on that because the goal is reunification. So we decided we wanted to adopt, just straight adopt, which is a different process for sure. But part of why I liked that idea too was my mom grew up and spent some time in foster care and actually aged out before she was adopted. And,
Wow.
she got her family. She never had that feeling of belonging. God has now blessed her with a husband and children and grandchildren, and it's all good. But I was like, if we foster a child, that's meeting a huge need. That child still might not end up in a stable, loving, forever home, similar to my mom. Whereas if we adopt a child, they never have to wonder about that. They get mom, dad, siblings for life. And so there was something really appealing to me about that. So from there, then you need to decide if it's domestic or international. International really didn't work for us, mostly because some of the countries you have to stay in for sometimes a month at a time. And I was like, for all of our children and for my husband's job, I don't know, that just didn't seem feasible for us at the time. It seemed like domestic adoption was what he had for us. And then beyond that, it's getting home study approved, filling out a lot of paperwork. It's going to look different for every person depending on what agency they're working with, but that's pretty much how ours looked. And then once your paperwork is in and you're active with, either your agency or your consultant, it's been busy, busy, busy for months. And then all of a sudden you're just kind of waiting by the phone,
Oh
which
my
was
goodness.
to go from like crazy to just like nothing for a
Oh
while.
yeah. Like hurry up and wait is what it sounds like it is. Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. We matched in October for a baby that's going to be born in March, which is pretty long time to match. Like a lot of times if you're matching with an expectant mom, which is like a birth mom, but she's not actually a birth mom until she gives birth, just like adoption lingo there. But a lot of times they are a lot further along in the pregnancy, like somewhere between like 36 and 38 weeks. So we matched really fast, but we will end up with like a 5-month wait because the mom we matched with was 2 weeks when we matched. So we kind of have like the opposite of like the usual situations. Yeah.
Have y'all been able to communicate with the mom?
So we're able to communicate through the agency, and then beyond, if and when she's ready, we're looking at having an open adoption. So we're really hopeful, the relationship we can build with her.
That is awesome. What made you decide on an open adoption?
We didn't decide. When we saw cases, the expectant moms would put their preference on closed, open, or semi-open adoption. And you consider that along with the other details of the case as to whether or not you say yes or no. We tried to be open to saying yes to most cases, but there were a couple things that were really outside of what we felt was a good fit for our family or even a good fit for her. Some of the things they were looking for in a family, we knew like we weren't really that. Closed adoption kind of being an option. Like we wouldn't have said no to a case just based off of the mom wanting a closed adoption. But through our research, we found that at least a semi-open adoption is really healthy for the adopted child. And so not right away did we think we wanted an open adoption because we like assumed that meant potentially putting our child at risk of like hurt or pain or harm or something, or almost like having 2 sets of parents and co-parenting. We very quickly learned that that's not what an open adoption is. It's really beautiful in its own way. And so we were honestly really excited to see her case as preferencing open adoption because our hearts had pretty much already been opened to that. Especially when we read this case in particular, we just felt like we were super ready to embrace her with open arms too.
That's awesome. Oh my goodness. So what is that going to look like in March whenever y'all bring this baby home, like for your kids and for homeschooling? What's your plans for that?
Yeah, I mean, we'll be off of school for about a month because when we travel, we have to stay in that state for a minimum of 2 weeks plus the days in which it takes for the paperwork to be filled out. So stay about 3 weeks minimum. Um, so we're kind of just saying, okay, we'll probably be off of school for a month, out of our co-op for a month. When we get back, we'll probably be eager to dive back into lessons. And even though I won't be postpartum, it'll still be a newborn.
Oh
So
yeah,
you
absolutely.
I think that'll look like being, a little bit more flexible, slowing down a little bit, probably utilizing audiobooks. So similar to how it was when I had my daughter Oakley. She was due in July. Well, she was actually due in June, but I had her in July. She decided to wait a little longer. But we kind of just like took that summer off. So I don't have like a ton of experience schooling with a newborn because we had like the summer off. But maybe that actually would have been a little bit easier than by the time we started schooling, she's already like rolling and stuff. So, newborns are challenging as well. And she was only a few months older than a newborn, but she was already that much more like awake and not sleepy. And it was just an adjustment. The older kids helped or someone kind of hang with her while I did some school with the so it's just like a team effort. And that's another way that homeschooling teaches life skills because whenever a sibling is introduced into the family, they have to learn how to work around that, just like they will someday when they're having their own children.
That's awesome. That's so true. Oh my goodness. I know with my little ones, my 3-year-old actually helps out with my 1-year-old
Well,
sometimes, and they play together. I mean, obviously she doesn't have that responsibility of like taking care of her, but it does make the process so much easier for my older one because I get to just let them play and then focus on school. So,
even right now we have, our toddler, and I can't really pick what's harder to homeschool with, a newborn or a toddler. I'm decided on that.
that's so true. Oh my goodness. My 1-year-old will sneak down the hallway. I've never used baby gates ever. Okay. But I'm on my first time, and my husband was like, babe, we got to get baby gates because she's going down the hallway and anything she can find to stick in the toilet while I'm distracted. I mean, she is trying her best. So I totally understand
All
that.
the newborn moms currently will say the newborn phase is the hardest, and all the toddler moms right now will say the toddler phase is the hardest. I remember the newborn though, so that's why I can't decide. Even though I have a get into everything toddler, I remember the newborn. They're both hard.
Oh, yeah. It's just different types of hard for sure.
Hard, absolutely. But what I kind of try to do is like she's usually pretty good during Bible time again because we're like eating breakfast and stuff. But once we start breaking down into those individual lessons, I just try to make her feel as much a part of it as I can. So maybe she's coloring or using like those dot markers, playing with some Play-Doh. But she's really busy, so she loses interest pretty fast. But when I break down into like a little bit of time just doing math with my oldest or a little bit of time doing some reading with my middle, I kind of send whoever I'm not currently working with on their break and they don't play with the toddler. And thankfully they want to. Like my oldest all on her own was like, oh, for my breaks, can I play with Oakley? And I'm thinking like, yes, please.
Right.
I could hear them in the living room, like playing with their toys. And I was like, okay, I can focus on my other two right now. And that was so helpful. So not every day is that smooth, but definitely it's okay to have everybody work as a team. And that sometimes means everybody tag teaming the toddler.
Oh,
Or,
yeah. There you go. Well, and that brings me to another question. Do you think that homeschooling has strengthened the sibling bond that your kids have with them being multiples and being able to be just home every day? And
I do think so because they are each other's best friends. Yes, they have some other friends as well, but it's like the opposite was true for me. Like I feel like my sister was my sister and I loved her, but I had like friends, and even I didn't want my sister playing with us because we were older and she was younger and get away. It's so sad that that's a lot of times what happens, but now I just see my children as each other's best friends. And there's no like, I can't play with you because you're younger, or I can't play with you because you're a boy and I'm a girl. It's just they love each other and they bicker for sure. Like that happens. But that's also a learning opportunity to stop and remember, like, how would Jesus want us speaking to the other person? And hey, we care about people more than things. So are we really going to be so bothered by her picking that up without asking? I think we can show some grace. But also, hey, maybe next time you can ask. Working through those things, I think helps to, one, strengthen their relationship for the future because adults have little things too, and they'll be able to work through things because they've worked through them as children. But I think they'll also really just be lifelong friends because they've just done life together. And I just think so important and has become one of my reasons why I love homeschooling is because of those sibling relationships being so important to me. I want them to be the kind of siblings that can just call each other for anything and be there for all of each other's highs and lows in the future. And I think that they'll have that. And a big part of that is because of the homeschooling experience we've had.
Yeah, I always feel like with my kids, like I'll tell them all the time, like that is your best friend, okay? Like they're gonna be around a lot longer than I am, you know. I mean, I don't want to put that thought in their heads of like, oh, mom may not be around forever, but at the same time, like,
Yeah.
you know? And so that's beautiful to hear. So I like to end every podcast with a question. What is your favorite book that has impacted your adulthood? I feel like as moms, we are also modeling this lifelong learning that we're trying to instill in our kids. And so it can be any genre. So do you have any books that you would recommend that you have that has shaped you for the better for your life?
I think it's hard to narrow it down to one book, but I think Sally Clarkson's books in general have been so impactful in my life because she speaks of motherhood so highly, doesn't shy away from sharing about the hard things, but talks about the beauty in everything. And so The Life-Giving Home is especially one of my favorites, but I just really recommend all of her books because they're just so honest and real, but encouraging. They're faith and they're just so special. So I would say that if that's not just one book, but all of her books really are so wonderful. And I think that any of them would be so worth the read.
Oh, yeah. I love Sally Clarkson's material. I have her Tea Time Discipleship book, and it has been so good. So good. Well, Mackenzie, thank you so much for being here with us. And I'm going to include a link to her adoption website. I understand y'all are funding for March. Is that right? Are y'all raising funds for that? How can people help out with your adoption journey?
So praying for us is so helpful. We really appreciate that. Just praying for patience and for all the things that we need to line up in March. I'm praying for the expectant mom and for her heart as she follows through on this decision that she has really prayerfully made, but that still is going to be a big sacrifice for her. So just, prayers for all involved. It's a very emotional process. So it's exciting, but it's also just a lot of big feelings. And then, that God will provide. We've trusted him to provide. And so far, we're still really short on our goal of what we need to bring this little baby home, but we are not discounting how much she can show up and how much she can move. So, if you feel led to help in any way, we would love that. And what I've tried to tell people is even $10 goes a long way because when that's multiplied by so many generous people, it really adds up. So prayers and just if you feel on your heart to send a donation, we have a donation page. And just are so thankful for anybody who's been sharing along this journey with us and just shown their love and support in any way.
That's awesome. Yeah, we will include the link to your adoption page. I think it is such a beautiful thing. I love seeing adoption stories, and yours in particular. I watched your video of all of your kids. If you want to hear her story, you can go on I think it's your website. Is that right? And on your Instagram page at Twigs and Sage, and they share about what led them to adoption, and you get to see all of her beautiful kids, and it is just a beautiful thing. I love that you're doing that. Hopefully one day my family can also follow in your footsteps. So I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing about your homeschooling journey, and thank you so much for being here.
And I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Home Edify podcast. All literature, book recommendations, and websites mentioned in today's show will be linked in the details below. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, and don't forget to follow along on Instagram at Home Edify Podcast to enjoy clips from our latest episodes and day-to-day encouragement. Our prayer is that you were inspired to seek after your child's heart and mind. Thanks again for listening.
So, Mom, are you done with your podcast?
Yeah, I learned so much.
Thanks for coming to the podcast.